Welcome to another edition of Interruptions. I'm your host, Otis Smith. Today, I bring back a brilliant man, former general manager, worked with Priority Sports, uh, ESPN analyst. If you don't know this face that you see, that means you don't watch ESPN. But I'm talking no other than the brilliant Mike Tannenbaum. How you doing, sir?
Otis, it's great to be with you. Thanks so much for having me back and looking forward to catching up with you.
Thank you. I wanted to bring you on, as you know, since the last time it's been about a year or so. But lately there's been some news, and I wanted to dive into in some topics with you because I think a lot of times, and I'm sure you think the same way, but if not, don't worry, I'll say it for you. I think sometimes people not listening, man. When you don't Get Up or some of these shows, they're not hearing what you're saying. It's like you say something, then they just kind of move on. So I say, let me bring Mike on the show so my people and everybody that will see this can actually hear what Mike is saying. So uh my first question for you was simply, do you feel kind of like the expectations for players are misguided when they don't have a supporting cast that's good? Whether, like if you got a good corner, say you got a cover corner, if you want to call him a shutdown corner, but if he doesn't have any help on the other side, or he doesn't have a good safety, or a D line, because front end, back end, same thing with a quarterback. You got a good quarterback, but he doesn't have a supporting cast. Do you think that too much is made on how good this player is when it's a team sport and there's not enough around that particular player for them to succeed?
Yeah, Otis, I think that's a great point. If we go back to the Super Bowl, the COVID Super Bowl when Kansas City played
Hmm.
Tampa Bay in Tampa Bay,
Right.
you know, Tom Brady's going to get the headlines and Tom Brady wins Super Bowl and, it's romantic and it's like this perfect ending.
Yeah.
But the reality of that game is like Todd Bowles and that Tampa Bay defense whipped the Kansas City offensive line. And football is the ultimate team sport, Otis. And as great as Patrick Mahomes is, and I don't think there's any question he's the best player in the sport today,
Correct.
without a good offensive line, he was reduced to, a guy that, they had no shot. And, when I first was the GM of the Jets, my first draft, we drafted two offensive linemen because I felt like, unless we could protect up front, nothing mattered. So I think it's absolutely, it's the ultimate team sport. You talk about corner, we could look at the Cowboys, for example, and they got Trayvon, Diggs on one side, and now they go out and get Stephon Gilmore on the
Right.
other side, and absolutely, teams are going to attack your weaknesses. So without question, I think that's a really, really good point. You've got to take into consideration, in terms of like what else that team has, and it's truly the ultimate team sport.
Yeah, because I just see it a lot of times where and I wish I could get him on, but no offense to Trent Dilfer, but Trent Dilfer was on a team that had a loaded defense. I mean, anytime you can have a Ray Lewis or someone say, listen, if you guys get 10 to nothing, if you get 10 points, trust me, we got the game won. Because
Right,
they got enough around him that says, hey man, you don't have to do it all. Just put up 10 points and we got the rest.
right.
So I think sometimes when I see you on ESPN and you're trying to explain all those dynamics, and people start saying, well, this quarterback is this and this quarterback is that. And it's like, are you looking at the team though? You're looking at the skill set of one quarterback. Like a lot of times, when people say, well, that's not what Brady would do, or that's not what Patrick Mahomes. There's not a lot of Patrick Mahomes. If it was, everybody would have one. So we got to
That's right.
stop. We got to stop saying, well, Brady, listen, if there was a lot, everybody would have a Tom Brady, but there's not. So you got to, like you said, you got to deal with what you have.
Yeah, and you got to figure out other ways to win the game. And when we were at the Jets, we didn't have Tom Brady, but we had a great defense. We could run the ball, and we didn't always have success against Tom. But when we did, we just approached the game differently.
Can you explain, like the expectations? Like sometimes I feel like the expectations of a player because of the draft status is kind of wrong. Like, and
Yeah,
what can you explain that? Like, just kind of with any position you want to pick, like a first or second rounder, the expectation versus the team that they're going to and the system and things that, have to go right for a player to be successful.
Yeah, I mean, let's get right into it. Like Zach Wilson and Anthony Richardson, those are two quarterbacks that were drafted in the last couple of years, and
Right.
the expectations are really high. And I think Zach Wilson, we'll never know, but to throw him in there as quickly as they did in New York, um, I would have waited. Likewise, Anthony Richardson started 13 games. It doesn't matter if the Colts win 4 games this year or 7. They're not going to win a championship this year. They went out, they got a good backup in Gardner Minshew, and I would just bring Anthony Richardson along very, very slowly. I don't know what the rush is to play, because, and I'm as guilty as this as anybody, Otis, but
Sure.
we're all in this like instant evaluation, and I would just bring him along slowly, let him have a mastery level of the offense, and
Hmm.
I don't think there's a rush, but we put a lot of pressure on these teams and these young quarterbacks now to get them out there, and I'm hard pressed to understand why we do that.
And yeah, that's one of the things I was looking at, because sometimes just what we were talking earlier, you get a quarterback and he's going to be the future, but you really don't have anything around him, whether it's the skill set, whether it's like you mentioned, the offensive line, and you're going to get this kid shell shocked after a while, or developing bad habits of trying to play hero ball once you do put the pieces around him, and for the quarterback to understand, hey, just put the ball in play, take it where it needs to go, versus trying to make hero plays, because the player's been doing it for so long. That's the only way they know how to play. So I'm glad that you stated that sometimes this guy needs to sit and watch based on your evaluation that you saw, and say, hey, he's going to be all right, but I think he needs to sit. I don't want to put him out there yet, because yeah, we got a good offensive line, but maybe we don't have the skill set around it, or vice versa.
That's right. I totally agree with that, and that's why you have to have organizational alignment, just in terms of like making sure the owner's on board, the head coach is on board.
Okay.
Just in terms of look, if Anthony Richardson goes out and plays well this year, that's wonderful, right? That's great. But
Hmm.
we want to win a championship with him. So what's the best way to do that? You got a rookie head coach, you got a rookie quarterback, and let's just make sure that we're on the same page. So, like you say, be it hero ball, expectations, like we are all aligned.
Now, this next question for you, I'm glad you're here, because I've been wanting to get into this with you. Your philosophy versus my philosophy, and I'm gonna tell you my philosophy, and then just kind of, because you sat in that seat. So, but the question is, do you believe a running back should be drafted in the first round? My philosophy is, let me give you mine before you give me yours. My philosophy is yes, and I'm coming from you sitting in the seat that you sat, far as the team, representing the team as a GM, because he's got a 4-year deal with the fifth year option. So if the guy's playing with you, got this guy for 5 years, and under the current CBA, you can still franchise him 2 more years. So you've got him for 7 years, versus if you think when he starts to get near that age 30, the age 30 where running backs start to fall off, you could either get a cheaper free agent or go back into the draft, versus if you're drafting someone in the second or third round whose contract is only going to be a 3-year deal, and if they break out, they're going to come up for a new contract faster. Your thoughts?
Right. No, it's a fair point. I would tell you, like, you look at someone like Jameer Gibbs. Jameer's gonna be a
Okay.
great player.
Okay.
I just think when you look at a guy like Devin A. Train, who was taken by Miami, for example, similar guys, explosive players. I think Gibbs is the better player, but one player was taken 2 rounds later. And all my
Hmm.
point is, like, look, there was a couple of running backs, that we all saw that were going to go early. Bijan Robinson.
Yeah.
I talked to Tom Herman. Tom's the head coach at FAU. He was there when they recruited Bijan to Texas, and he was just talking about, like, he's a great slot receiver.
Mm.
So the point is, like, Bijan's a great player, and I don't have a problem saying, like, wow, he's a first round talent. All I'm
Hmm.
saying is, like, when you look at Atlanta pass rush, another corner, maybe even quarterback. We don't know how good Desmond Ritter's going to be.
True.
So it's not necessarily like the player isn't worth a first rounder. My point is like typically you can find those guys um, after the first round in the premium positions, be it corner, pass rush, or quarterback. You may not. And likewise with Detroit, pass rush, another corner. They moved on from Akuda. Like they revamped their secondary. My point is those are two good players. I
Mm-hmm.
think they could have made better choices, but the players themselves should turn out to do well in the NFL.
Now, when you say quarterback, when you talk about the Falcons, by me living in Atlanta, um, I felt like they missed the mark last year. They were in the perfect spot to get a couple not last year, but the year that the 49ers made the trade and moved up, and
Right.
Atlanta was drafting right behind them. And
Yep.
I was like, you got to take a quarterback right here. You got to take a quarterback, and of course we know they took Ritter, much later. But and that's why I wanted to give you my reason why I was saying a running back. I'm saying if one is worthy of the first round, I was just looking at how long you would have that player, as far as under contract. I was just only looking at it from the contract side versus if you got someone in the third round, second or third round, where they may come up for a contract renewal, faster. That
Right.
was where I was coming from with it. Um, do you believe NFL contracts? And I think you and I had this conversation before, and you mentioned it on ESPN. And like I said, they don't listen to you. They don't listen to you. Do you think NFL contracts should be shorter just for the guarantee? Like, so in other words, um, I'm a running back. I'm coming up for a contract. And so they say, okay, you're going to get a $40 million contract, 25 guaranteed. Well, the guaranteed is paid out basically in 3 years. So why not just do a guaranteed 3 years, 25? Because the other stuff is not guaranteed. And can they simply do also somewhat what the NBA does, which is a team option and a player option? So in other words, if
Yeah.
the team, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah. No, those are all good points. Like I thought that was going to be the compromise with Lamar. Go shorter. So Lamar gets another bite of the apple. Baltimore, if they're concerned about the amount of guarantee, instead of having it 5 years, go three. So I'm for shorter contracts. I think ultimately the right players get paid the right amount. As it relates to options, like basically once the
Mm-hmm.
guarantee plays out and there's
Mm-hmm.
more time left on the contract, it's really a team option. That's really what the contract is. And then as a player option, those are hard. I did one like 20 years ago. They're few and far between. They just aren't in the system. But I
Right.
think like if Lamar was part of this conversation,
Mm-hmm.
the best way to effectuate what you're saying, Otis, is to say like, hey, we're not going 5 years, we're gonna go 3 years, and that gives Lamar, optionality to get back out to the market.
Yeah, and I said, and you mentioned that on the show on ESPN, and I said, did they not just hear what he's, because you were telling them, look, because you and I talked about this before, is which I'm sure I'm just as baffled as you. Why no one picked up the Kirk Cousin model?
Right, right.
Like
That's
I,
right.
like who's not, when they talking about moving it forward, setting a precedent for the next contract and this, that, I'm like, well, Kurt did it for you guys at the quarterback position, but you guys' agent never picked up the model and went with it. It's like everybody went back to the same old, same old.
Yeah, I think the Kirk Cousins model, like again, like that's a win-win. Like with the salary cap, there's a ceiling and a floor. Like the players are going to get the money. Let's make sure the right players are getting the money. Like that's what everybody in the system wants.
Right. The right players are getting the money, and you still have room, because I remember you were saying before that with that shorter term, even though it is guaranteed, it helps the salary cap as well. So now you can continue to build out the roster, because you don't have all this dead cap money that you
That's
have
right.
to worry about later on down if you cut a guy, or like the who was it, Green Bay, what they had to work out with the Jets trading Aaron Rodgers. Like, okay,
Right.
well, who's gonna take that? Who's gonna take that hit on that on that cap?
Yeah, no, that's part of you have to manage that. That's why, Jordan Love being inexpensive allows Green Bay to eat all that cap.
How do you, from your perspective, evaluate the college quarterbacks as far as ones that play in a pro system versus when I say play in a pro system, I mean also regurgitating the plays in the huddle versus quarterbacks who, they just turn their head, look to the sideline, see the signs, and then they run the play. Because when you bring that type of quarterback into your system and he gets with the coach, he's going to have to be able to call the play in the huddle. He's not going to be able to look on the sideline.
And Otis, let's take it a step further.
Okay.
Some quarterbacks get to the NFL, they've never taken a snap under center.
Yes.
They're they've only been in shotgun. So, there's a great this is an incredibly simple saying, but there's like a
Okay.
lot of wisdom to it, which is draft good players from good schools and ask them to do exactly what you see. And more times than not, you'll get it right. And with quarterbacks, when they have, as you said, like what's known as check with me, you get to the line of
Hmm.
scrimmage, you look at the defense, you go back, you basically have two plays. It could be a run pass, it could be field boundary. It just depends on
Hmm.
what the play is. When the quarterback doesn't have to, do sort of like that in the NFL, they're the ones that are looking at it and making the audible. They're the ones calling the checks. That's part of the growing pains. We talked about guys like Zach Wilson,
Right.
having trouble. And, look, Bryce Young, CJ Stroud, those guys have started 25 or more games at Alabama, Ohio State. They're going to be fine, But someone like Anthony Richardson, he's only started 13. Like, I would bring him along slowly for, reasons you just said. So that's not to say that you can't transition as a quarterback
Hmm.
when
Hmm.
there's check with me's. It's just another layer that you have to, you have to make sure that they can do it. You want to spend a lot of time, in the off season before the draft, making sure that they can, process, make quick decisions. Again, you're worried about that more from smaller schools, smaller level competition. Again, going back, Zach Wilson, he played at BYU where the Baker Mayfields, the Sam Darnolds, they're at
Hmm.
the the Power Five conferences.
How do you, and that was, you segue beautifully to my next question, which is when you're dealing with a smaller school, even like the HBCU schools, and you're scouting, right? What would you say is the difference between today and say when a Walter Payton was coming through, when a Doug Williams was coming through, when a Richard Dent was coming through? Because they came from smaller schools, right, and became Hall of Fame players. But in today's game, Mike, how does one, like you said, looking at the level of competition versus saying, you know what, this is going to be a great player like a Steve McNair. How do you try to balance that?
I think generally speaking, our sports covered better today than when the Walter Paytons and the Doug Williams or even
Hmm.
Steve McNair came out. So I think there's less under the radar. I think that's given the popularity of sport. I think these other TV deals,
Hmm.
sort of like amplify players. Certainly, there's plenty of like all-star games postseason, so there's plenty of opportunities for those players.
Hmm.
Um, with that said, I think there's a huge East Coast bias in our sport. Like,
It
you know,
is.
I I like I've said this before. Like, I think Justin Herbert may have been the first player picked if he was in the SEC. Like some of those late night
we're
West
not
Coast
wa-
games,
we're not
good
watching
ones.
those.
Yeah, yeah. So, but to answer your question about the like some of these other conferences, the
Hmm.
HBCUs,
Hmm.
I think they're still could go under the radar, but not nearly as much as it once was, a generation ago.
Well, I'm saying, like, when you're back, like if you're sitting in that seat and you're saying, okay, this kid was HBCU school, or it could be a smaller school like North Dakota, and this kid had 14 interceptions, and you got a guy played a Power Five, he played at Georgia or Alabama or Tennessee somewhere, right? And let's say he only has six or three interceptions, but you're looking at the how do you weigh the productivity versus the competition, to say you're going
Yeah,
to take a chance. That's what I'm kind of getting at.
Yeah, it's hard,
Okay.
and I think the more boxes you could check, like, do they have the requisite measurables, the height, weight, speed?
Hmm.
Are they as explosive? Like, that's ways you can normalize data when obviously the level of competition is going to be different. So you're looking for ways to try and make it apples to apples.
Hmm.
But that's what makes the draft so subjective. Like, it's never going to be, apples to apples.
I got you. My final question for you. Now, I'm not trying to get you into trouble, messy, or trying to be messy because my show is not messy, but I'm just curious on because you sat on both sides, far as working with the sports management company, being a general manager, being in that front office in the NFL. Should sports be covered just given the knowledge of the game and not trying to create narratives for the game?
Yeah, I love that. So we have a website, and hopefully all your listeners will check it out. The 33rd team. So there's 32 NFL teams. The
Okay.
33rd team.
Okay.
We have a lot of former coaches and GMs on that site.
Okay.
Really for reasons you just said, Otis. Like, we want to be like thoughtful around the game and talk about what happened, not necessarily what happened, but how it happened, why it happened.
Hmm.
And if you check out the site, it's the 33rd team.com,
Okay.
33rd team.com. We have a free newsletter. And I think it's to your point, Otis, like, we don't want to be messy. We don't want to be loud. We want to be smarter and more insightful. And I think our game is so complicated that, you know, somebody could throw an interception. It goes back to your very first question, and the
Hmm.
left tackle may have, missed the call where he was supposed to slide, and the quarterback didn't realize that there was going to be pressure, and that's what makes our sport so interesting. It's literally the game of chess played on grass by the best athletes on the planet, and it's great to watch them, at full speed. But I do think, there's space in our media world where we're trying to cut through.
Hmm.
ESPN is great, and I love them. But what we're trying to do at the 33rd team is try to be a little bit more differentiated and a little bit deeper.
Yeah, because I look at I've had the pleasure of like I interviewed Eric Davis, played with the 49ers and the Carolina Panthers years ago. It was funny, we were talking about how frustrating it could be if the safety doesn't know his job, and Eric's playing zone, but the safety is not playing zone. So now you let the guy go because you got the short half, I mean the short side of the field, maybe 10 yards, and you turn around and say, oh man, the safety is not covering. So now you're trying to run back, and it makes it look like that you got beat deep. And Eric said something to me. He said, and I'll never forget it. He said, the hardest thing to do is when you know the play, right? Like you know what the offense is going to do, right? But you got to bait the quarterback like you don't know. And then when you see the play develop the way it was going to develop because studied film, then make a play on the ball. He said
Yeah,
that
that's
he said that's that because some people don't trust what they see and they scared to make the play, you know. Or sometimes the defensive back tips his hand that he knows the play and the quarterback sees it. So he says you got to know the play, but you can't let the quarterback know that you know what's coming.
that you.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. So you got to bait him so you can make the play. So I appreciate you coming on the show again and giving us some insightful knowledge as always and usual. Look out in maybe about 20 minutes to an hour. I'll drop the trailer on Instagram. I appreciate because I follow you and you follow me back. I always appreciate that. I never take it for granted. Once again, enjoy vacationing. Stay safe out there and be blessed, man. And we love what you do.
Thanks so much, Otis. Really appreciate our friendship, and I love people that are passionate of what they do. And it's clear you're very passionate about football. And happy to jump on. And I appreciate your friendship. And have a great weekend.
Before I let you go, one thing I want to do this year, coming up next that I didn't do, and I was going to reach out to you, but I think it was too late. So I do a preview of the Super Bowl every year. So this past year, I had Doc Walker from Washington. I
Yeah.
had a big OJ Anderson. I had my man from Florida State, Charlie Ward. And so I want for the 2024 Super Bowl, based on, we'll work with your schedule. I want to bring you on for a Super Bowl, preview for 2024.
All right. That sounds great.
All right. Peace.
All right. Thanks, Otis. Take care.
Uh-huh.